Welcome to ISKCON of Silicon Valley. Tonight is BYOBG. I brought my own Gita. Never leave home without it. This is the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And if you walked in the wrong place, please stay. Because this is an organization and a friendly community where we teach the basic tenets of real happiness in life. And the founder and the main teacher for our society, his name is A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And you'll see him on this ornate seat, which is called a Vaiśeṣika, which means that he's a representative of a line of teachers that trace all the way back to the beginning of the universe. And such teachers are charged with delivering the message of Krishna, who's called the Adi Purusha, or the original person. He doesn't have an origin like we do. We have mother and father. Of course, he has a mother and father, but they're not his origin. Not much space in between each. And he brings the teachings, does the acharya, which means one who teaches by example, very specifically of Bhagavad-gītā, which is a primary text. Bhagavad means God, and Gita means song. As one of our members of our community here is a songwriter, and had recently written, produced, and released a song which has become quite popular. And one of the lyrics in it is that life is a song. Why don't you sing along? And the Bhagavad-gītā gives this sense also that there's a song that comes from God, and if you'll tune into that song and learn to sing it, then you'll experience what Krishna talks about in the Bhagavad-gītā in the 5th chapter as yonta sukho tararamas, which means that ya means somebody who, sukho means happiness, sukha, ka means space, and su means good. So if anybody here in California has ever told you when you ask them how they're doing and they said, I'm in a good space, that's what sukha means. The opposite is dukkha, which means a bad space, and sometimes people say that, right? How are you? I'm in a bad space, or good space. That's sukha and dukkha. So Krishna says in the Bhagavad-gītā, yonta sukho tararamas, which means that a person who's practicing what we're teaching here, what is coming down through our teacher and through the Bhagavad-gītā, can experience antar sukh. Antar means within, the happiness that's naturally within us. Tatantar jyotir evaya, Krishna says, and this is from the 5th chapter of the Bhagavad-gītā. He said, one learns from the Bhagavad-gītā how to aim inwardly. Inwardly is also, or the journey within is also described in the beginning of another book called the Srimad Bhagavatam, in which it says, Nigama kalpa torar galitam palam. Gama means to go, and ni means within. So nigama means to go within. And Krishna continues, this is one of the teachings of the Bhagavad-gītā, one of the aspects of the song, which we'd like to sing along with. Yonta sukho tararamas tatantar jyotireva sayogi brahma nirvanam brahma bhuto digacchati. Second part of the verse means that the person who's experiencing happiness within, whose aim is inward, becomes liberated. And Brahma bhutoti gacchati, that person doesn't take birth again here in this world, but after leaving the present body, such a person goes to the Supreme. Supreme is not some impersonal light, but it's a reunion with our well-wisher, our benefactor, and our source, Krishna, who's called the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the Bhagavad-gītā, God is described as a person. In fact, he's the one speaking the Bhagavad-gītā himself, and he's describing his various attributes and qualities. And in our Krishna consciousness movement, we advocate that one read the Bhagavad-gītā and learn some of the tenets of the Bhagavad-gītā, and then learn how to apply them. Or just take out the learn part. Take the learn to, edit that out. Apply them. Learn what they are and apply them. And there's support for that. There are practices that one can learn from the Bhagavad-gītā, and one can learn the application of them from the Acharya, who teaches, here's how you may apply most efficiently these practices. And when one does, then there's an experience of inner happiness, which surpasses any of the external happiness in the world. In the same chapter that I've selected the verse that I spoke about just now, Krishna also says, he contrasts with the kind of happiness I might seek outwardly through my senses. And he says, Yehi samsparshaja bhoga dukkha yonaya evate adyantavanta konteya nateshu ramate buddha. Some of the same words in this verse. And sparsha means touching. Sparsha. Go like this. Sparsha. It'll help you remember the word, unless you already know it. And what he's saying here, yehi samsparshaja bhoga. Bhoga means to enjoy something. For instance, if you came home after a long day and you saw a big box of cupcakes with sprinkles on top, and you thought, maybe I would really like to not only touch those with my hand, but I'd like to cram them all in my mouth with a big glass of milk. 18 cupcakes. And then I'd be happy. But probably not. And in any case, the idea of bhoga means my senses are there, they have an urge, and I feel if I can just connect my senses to the object that's calling to me, sort of the sense of urge, then I'll be happy. But that happiness is short-lived, says Krishna. And in fact, in this verse, Krishna gives us one of the real keys to happiness. Yehi samsparshaja bhoga dukkha yonai evate. He said within that concept that if I just touch the external environment through my various senses, the eyes can touch things, right? Say yes. And the ears can touch, the sound comes in. There are various kinds of sound. And if I'm touching them with the idea of bhog, that I'll enjoy them, he says that kind of interaction with the world doesn't bring happiness. That's big news, don't you think? No one ever said that before. At least not in kindergarten. I never learned it from Miss Flood, that was her name, my teacher. And I didn't learn it in 4th grade from my favorite teacher, Mr. Weber. And nor was it in junior high school, and all the way up to my junior year, after which I said, enough's enough. And skipped the SATs. And there's no information like this that's direct and clear that if I try harder to get in contact with more objects that I can touch with my senses, it won't bring happiness. And here comes the rest of the verse. Yehi samsparshacha bhoga dukkha yonaya evate. Yonaya means a womb. So metaphor coming, a metaphor alert. There's a way in which Krishna says here, if you think that's going to bring you happiness and then you reach out to touch that thing, then something's born from that experience, and it's a little character named Dukhi who will follow you around and harass you. And little Dukhi means the little perpetrator of misery in your life. And the more things you touch, the more things you gather and keep around you so you can touch them regularly, the more little Dukhis you'll get following you around. So he said that an intelligent person, one who becomes intelligent from reading the Bhagavad-gītā, is forewarned. Forewarned is, let's work on this together. Forewarned is, no one's heard this except for two people, Shraddha and a Kṛṣṇa, because Kṛṣṇa's heard everything somehow, from not just life, but every other life. But forewarned is forearmed. Let's try it again. Forewarned is forearmed. What does it mean? Not forearmed like in Vaikuntha, where people have four arms. Forewarned means forearmed means what? Shraddha, you said, so why don't you say? Yogadesh, you want to say? You raised your hand. I volunteered Shraddha, but you raised your hand, so you take it. There's Robert's rules that apply here. Okay, go ahead.
Hare Krishna. You said forewarned means forearmed. So forewarned means to be warned beforehand, in advance. And the result of that is to be forearmed. You're armed, you're aware of that. Since you're warned beforehand, you're aware of something, and now you can take preventative action for it.
Oh, preventative action. You're so articulate. That was helpful. You're fortified. You take preventative action. That is one of the senses of this, to develop an intelligence from the simple teachings of Bhagavad-gītā, to have the wherewithal to have preventative measures lined up in your life so that you don't get overwhelmed by the senses and pushed in a direction that will bring you disquiet and misery. And therefore, Krishna also says in chapter 5, Shaknoti haiva yashodhum praksharira vimokshanat kama krodho dvamam vegam sayukta sa sukhinara. Who here would like to be a sukhinara? Who here knows what sukhinara means? Kṛṣṇa, what does it mean? A happy human. Who would like to be a happy human? I'm sure they already have someone. Humans are so smart, they always think of everything. At least everyone's smarter than me. So whenever I think of something and I'll look at it online, it's like, yeah, they already thought of that. Sukhinara, happyhuman.com. So Krishna says that there's a way you can become a happy human. And Shaknoti haiva yashodhum means that if you develop this power, Shakti, to not give in to emotions that come to you, and a couple of emotions he particularly mentions, and maybe we can relate to them. I'll mention what they are, and then I'll gauge by your reaction if you've ever experienced either of them. There's three. Kama means lust. Krodha means anger. Kama krodho bhavam vegam. Yeah, those two. Kama krodho bhavam vegam. Vegam means it came to you unannounced and just showed up. Lust and anger. Oh, you don't have to react. It's okay. Krishna says, if you develop the power to not give in to these before you leave this body, that's the cutoff point. You have to do it before you leave the body. And when is that? So, it's not like a final exam where you know the date and you can put it off to the last minute. You have to start practicing early. Shaknoti haivaya shodhum prak sharira. Prak means before, and sharira means the body. And vimokshanat means to give it up. So prak sharira, say prak sharira vimokshanat. It's a fancy way of saying before you die. But it's more articulate because it means before you give up your body, before you're liberated from your body, literally. Praksharira vimokshanat. Kama means lust, like hankering. You want something, and there's this burning fire, Krishna calls it. I got to have that. I got to have that. That's something that arises from what Krishna calls rajoguna. It's one of the prevalent qualities of nature, and when we dabble in it or when we associate with rajoguna, then that kama accumulates within our senses. It's almost like described as a substance. It gets in you and you have to clear it out. It's just the other day I was reawakening some of the electronic products that I have in my living space. That sounds very California, living space. And one of them had a remote control that I've never used ever since I purchased the item. And I opened it up, or pretty sure he did anyway, and inside the batteries had leaked. Have you ever had that happen? Yeah. And battery acid is, you have to be a little careful. So I took instruction from YouTube about how to clean it up, which means I needed to extract the batteries. They were sort of fused together, two of them, two AA's. And painstakingly got them out of there. And then there was still residue. So I had to use white vinegar, which luckily I have on hand, Q-tips and a toothbrush to get all that battery acid that had calcified inside there out. And then I had to put in new batteries. So when we come in contact with Rajagun haphazardly or recklessly, see, the Bhagavad-gītā helps us not to be reckless. Somebody look up reckless because it's a really good word. It helps us to not be reckless. What's the opposite of reckless? Careful? That's good. Careful? Prudent, careful. Be careful and prudent. Helps us to be careful and prudent. There's a way in which when we come in contact with Rajaguna, it gets in us like a substance, like battery acid, calcifies. It's in the various senses. Then get accustomed to the idea of grabbing onto everything in the world. Even if you can't touch it, then in the mind you want it anyway. And this is a kind of torture because we can't enjoy the world. As Prahlad Maharaj mentions in one of his teachings, he actually asks a question which is important to ask ourselves. Kutrashisha shruti sukham mrigatrishni rupa. He said, everyone's talking about happiness. For instance, which companies along the 101 freeway are advertising happiness that you've seen? If you ever see Coca-Cola, their motto, I don't know if it still is, but for a long time they said, open a bottle of happiness. Of course, I think Coca-Cola can also clean up battery acid. Can use it to untarnished coins and things. So I don't know what it does to your innards, but it's definitely not a bottle of happiness. Everybody knows it, but this is exactly Prahlad Maharaj's point. He said that people are always advertising things. He says, Kutra, where is that happiness? Kutra ashisha. There's some idea of a benediction you're going to get from touching the world more and more. And then he says, it's Shruti Sukham. Again, the word Sukham. And Shruti means everyone's talking about it and hearing about it, but they never actually get it. It's a false promise. Any other products? Seized candy? Push you over the line from pre-diabetic to diabetic? That's a lot of fun, right? That's really happiness. If you look around, you'll see lots. I saw when I was visiting Vaikuntha Nayaka down in South India, in Mysore. I was walking along the road and I saw a company selling PCV pipe, and it had an expression about how joyful you'll be when you're able to use their kind of PCV pipe. And so that is a prevalent idea in the world. But Prahlad says, forget it. It's what he calls mrigatrishni rupa. Mrigi means a deer, and rupa means, in this context, of water that appears to be there, but it's not really there. It's a mirage. So deers run after the water. So mrigatrishni rupa, they're thirsty and they run after the form of water, but it's not really there. So that's part of it. And what does reckless mean?
Reckless is an adjective. Middle English, retulous. From Old English, resilious, careless, thoughtless, heedless, earlier, resilious. Literally not reckoning of consequences.
Oh, come on, read it again.
Literally not recking of consequences.
Reckoning. Not reckoning of consequences. Huh?
Recking.
Spelled?
Recking.
See what I'm talking about? It's the same word. It's just language morphs over time. You can't even read Old English. Middle English, barely. It's very different. It changes from era to era, naturally. So, without being aware of the consequences, there's a sequence that opens up for us when we do certain things, and we have to be aware, as humans, this is our job. Everyone thinks their job is to make money, but our real job is to fortify ourselves through the song of the Bhagavad-gītā, so that we understand causality and consequence. There's a sequence that unfolds from everything we do. It's a little bit nerve-wracking being a human, don't you think? Because there's a lot of expected of us. It's like somebody gives you a very expensive vehicle to drive, and it's got all kinds of instruments, and it costs how much? No, much more. $500,000. Yeah. How much? All right, $250,000. That's probably on the low end. But still, there's a nerve-wracking sense that I'm driving somebody else's car, and anything can happen. I don't want to wreck it. So that's there in human life when we come to this clarity that this is a very powerful vehicle we've been given. And one of the first jobs is to tune it up and get insurance. And there's a way in which Krishna is giving us this tuning in the Bhagavad-gītā, which we're hearing about right now. The key to life is getting inward happiness, yonta sukar tararamas tatantar jyotirevaya. So yogi brahma nirvanam brahma bhuto digashati, because You don't want to stick around and keep trying the same things. It's like a little bird seeing his reflection in the mirror and banging his head against the reflection of the bird in the mirror. It's ludicrous. So he says, find the happiness within, or he's saying one who has learned how to find happiness within. He who, they who, that person who has learned to find the happiness within. Antar, suk, happiness within. To aramas, rama means happiness. To tantar, jyotir, means their aim is inward. So yogi brahma nirvanam, that person becomes liberated from the attachments and aversions that hold us in this world. And one realizes the folly of endeavoring for happiness from sparsha, with the objects of the senses in the material world. That's the verse. Yehi swam sparshacha bhoga dukkha yonaya evate adyanta vanta, because he realizes that the interaction with senses and their objects is temporary, fleeting, and it doesn't leave you with a good taste. The aftertaste is awful. And there's a consequence which is unfavorable. And therefore one should become intelligent, is the implication there. Yehi samsparshacha bhoga dukkha yonaya evate adyanta vanta konteya na te shuramate buddha, which means a person who has become intelligent. How? By reading the Bhagavad-gītā. It's that simple. This human body especially is designed for the Bhagavad-gītā. The Bhagavad-gītā, human body, doesn't matter which culture you come from. It's not cultural. It's human-centric. It's aimed at the human being especially. We're tuned especially to hear Bhagavad-gītā. If you hear other vibrations, other songs that are meaningless, that are in the category of sparshaja bhoga, are there any songs like that? That advocate for sparshaja bhoga? If I could only... Okay, here's one. I can sing a few for you. Ready? I want to hold your hand. One of the first songs I heard as a kid that got us all riled up. I want to hold your hand. That was a big hit from, well, I won't even mention the group, because if you don't know, I don't want to agitate your mind. But every song, every poem, generally, there are some metaphysical implications or indications in various poetry, poems and songs. But for the most part, there's an endeavor for touching the world. Even the aesthetic beauty of the world doesn't bring complete satisfaction, although it's a more refined kind of happiness because it's in the mode of goodness. But even that type of sparsha doesn't satisfy us. In fact, it leaves us feeling wanting. It leaves us wanting. And Krishna is saying, therefore, go for the antarsuk, the inner happiness. Learn by developing the habits, which is what the Bhagavad-gītā teaches, and what we teach here. Learn habits that point you inwardly, and also that give you good habits or the power to overcome the urges that naturally come into our mental system, and if they're not checked, they can lead to chronic discomfort, feeling dissatisfied, angry, lustful, and so forth. Those are a few categories of habits that Krishna recommends in the Bhagavad-gītā. And one of the premises of this idea is that we're as strong as our weakest habit. You can make a list of your habits when you get home and see which are the strong ones or desirable habits and which are the weak habits or the habits that don't take us to inner happiness. Can you conceptualize a few of them in your mind? I'm not going to call on you. Just think about making a list if you have a pad of paper. I recommend a big pad. I'll show you what I got. That's a good size for me, especially for writing down all my bad habits. They wouldn't fit on a smaller one. So if you can make a list, see what are the weakest habits that you have. Kṛṣṇa in the Gita talks about a few areas that you can work on. Would you like to hear what they are? Yes. One is the body. Another is speech. And the third is the mind. This he describes in the 17th chapter of Bhagavad-gītā. And he recommends developing habits, good habits, in relationship to the body. And one of them is, interestingly, learn to show respect to worthy persons, those who are advanced, especially spiritually. This is something mentioned also in a later teaching, a more recent teaching, it's about 500 years ago, from one of the disciples of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who was an incarnation of Kṛṣṇa, and then he had disciples, and they codified a lot of these teachings so people could assimilate them. And he talked about the ways that you should learn to use your body to show respect to those who deserve respect. This is one of the ways. Try this mudra. Do you know what mudras are? You know this mudra? Do you know... See if I can do it. This one, the Denu mudra, the cow's udders. Here's Matsya, the fish, and so forth. There are different mudras. The best of them all, best mudra anybody can practice is this one. Try it. This is like a lightning rod. You hold it next to your heart. It pulls in spiritual energy into your heart. Try it. If you point this at respectable persons, try pointing it at a respectable person somewhere. The kind of strength, spiritual strength that they have, it'll channel through this. It comes through like electricity through a lightning rod, and then it goes right into your heart. That's why it's important to do this a lot. And it's a disarming mudra. Do you notice that people use it nowadays? Comedians and public speakers, they'll come on stage and they'll do this. It's a universal. Not many people know that it's like a lightning rod, though. And Kṛṣṇa says one of the ways in which to purify your body is to learn how to show respect to those who are spiritually advanced. Isn't that interesting? That's a way to purify your body of these lower urges. And he talks about how to purify the mind, or more accurately, a habit to develop in your mind which helps you to stay steady in the spiritual path and develop this Shakti so you can overcome the lower urges. And there are several, but one of them that I find most fascinating and practicable is satisfaction. I used to think satisfaction either came or it didn't come. Or if somebody gave me what I wanted, then I'd feel satisfied. Otherwise, I wouldn't be satisfied. And it wasn't up to me. But the way Kṛṣṇa puts it is, it's a practice. Does anybody have any idea how to practice satisfaction? Okay, go ahead. Give him the microphone.
You can maybe practice happiness by doing devotional service.
I need a little more articulation, yes. I mean, I accept your premise, but I want something more practical. Go ahead.
Maybe we can try practicing gratitude first, because if we are grateful for something, we'll automatically also inculcate the idea of satisfaction.
Pretty powerful concept. Worth the price of admission tonight. Okay, Kṛṣṇa, Prabhu. We need microphones flowing on the back row. How do you practice satisfaction? This is one of the habits of the mind that you can develop. It's a good time of year to list these. Yeah.
This is kind of a bad example because of it's engaged in sinful activity. But when I was a child, my father took me fishing. And we got up very early in the morning to go out to Deep Creek Lake to go fishing. And I said, "Do you think we're going to catch some fish today?" And he said, "No." He said, if you don't think you're going to catch fish, then if you catch some, you'll be very happy. And if you don't catch any, it won't bother you. So if you don't have too much expectation that something has to go a certain way, then you can be very satisfied with however it goes.
Thank you. These are all helpful. Practice devotional service, as you said, because there is an inherent way, there is an inherentancy in devotional service described in one of the bhakti literatures that says, Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita Janya Yashivayaragyam Jnanam Chayarahaitukam. By practicing the tenets of bhakti, which we can talk about, then one naturally develops, as was your point, these qualities which help one to feel satisfied naturally. You said cultivate gratitude, which is altogether possible. It's like flipping a switch. Instead of complaining and seeing how things are out of place, isn't it a cliche that either you see the glass as half full or half empty? Is it? You've heard it, right? If everybody's heard it, it's a cliche. So, however, I like to go back and revisit cliches because they usually have some really profound meaning and a teaching to them. It's just that people rely on them too much. But going back to that, you can see the glass is half full or half empty. And if you see it as half full, then there's a way you can be grateful. And plus, as I might have mentioned yesterday, and many of you probably weren't here, gratitude leads us back to personal intention. Because you can't be grateful for an impersonal force. There has to be somebody doing something for you intentionally for you to be grateful for them. So this idea of gratitude and cultivating it, seeing the being grateful for one's very life. You don't need anything more than that practically. It leads back to our original source, Krishna. And then Kṛṣṇa Prabhu talked about a way to manage expectations and to be ready for what comes of its own accord. This is something Krishna actually mentions in the Gita, where he says, great word, yadrishcha, everyone say. Yadrishcha. Yadrishcha labha santushto. Labha means gain, and santushto, there it is, satisfaction, right? And he says, this word yadrishya means things that come of their own accord. Have you ever had anything come of its own accord? You didn't ask for it, kind of knew you wanted it, or maybe it even didn't, but it came anyway. So that's yadrishya. And so Krishna mentions somebody can practice this. Don't get overheated in what Prabhupada calls unnecessary necessities. Have you ever got into that, where you got a shirt or something and then you thought, well, I need it in every color now? And then you realized 90% of the colors really don't match your countenance or whatever colorists say. And then you got all these extra things. So some people practice this yadrishya labha santushto, be satisfied with gain that comes of its own accord. And this is these are 3 practices of satisfaction. So that's for the mind. What? So we talked about body, mind, and speech. So one of the ways Krishna, one of the habits of speech Krishna talks about is speaking beneficially. Have you ever said anything to anybody in your household that wasn't beneficial? I'll take that as a yes. There may be a way in which I heard this saying once, I don't know if it's true, but it sounds true to me, you only hurt the ones you love. There may be a way in which you could say things out of a sense of being dissatisfied or grouchy, and you may say something mean, mean-spirited to somebody, even somebody that you don't mean to say it to. And if you learn how to curb that tendency to say hurtful things, and you also filter before you speak and think, is this beneficial, what I'm saying? It's one of the filters you can put on. And you practice that. These kind of practices, including body, mind, satisfaction, and speech, which is especially beneficial because, and this is one of the great secrets of becoming a better person and getting the highest, developing your full potential in life. You didn't hear it here first, probably, but it's worth repeating. There's a verse from an ancient Purana that says that all spiritual advancement and all development of your potential in life comes from your tongue. And the tongue is the gateway sense. Bhagavatam says if you can control the tongue, then you know that all your senses are controlled. And if you can't control your tongue, then you can be sure that the other senses aren't controlled yet. So there's a way in which if you carefully audit what you're going to say to make sure that it's beneficial, one aspect. There's other aspects when keeping it simple. Just by that practice, developing that habit, it'll have a systemic effect on your life. Those are 3 habits that one might develop. To gain this spiritual strength through which one can overcome the strong urges that push us to do things that we didn't really intend to do and know aren't good for us, but we do it anyway. And they become careful. And then it becomes second nature habit, and then we have this power to look inwardly. Our mind isn't as turbulent, and we can take time to observe the inner workings, our inner workings, and see the difference between us and the urges and the emotions and the desires. And we can also see that we're consciousness, we're the conscious being within. And we can also perceive that there's a supreme consciousness that maintains us, that's Krishna. And in that recognition, there can be gratitude, then there can be service, and that's what we call devotional service. And then we can amend our lives in such a way that everything we do is for the purpose of pleasing the Supreme, and that's one of the themes that's in the Bhagavad-gītā. Anyone can learn it. If you're human, raise your hand. Then Bhagavad-gītā is the book for you because it's written for humans. And humans are extremely rare and special. And they're meant for tuning the human body, that is. Not for wanton living or reckless living, but for tuning. Then you can be happy. Shaknoti haiva yashodhum praksharira vimokshanat. Before you die, kama krodod bhavam begam dasa sukhinara. If you can develop these habits, as taught in the Bhagavad-gītā, then you can become a happy human. So, let's see if you have any questions. Yes, Kṛṣṇa Prabhu?
Just a reflection, if I can, because on the way over here, I had to stop at the bank to get some money, so I stopped in Los Gatos. And I'm living in Florida now, where things are a little simpler. And it's like in Los Gatos, it's like a heavenly planet, almost, that it seemed like everybody has a lot of money, and they're really nice restaurants that we don't have anything like that in Florida. And people are sitting outside. They're paying $12 for a little French pastry or something like that. And but I can see and understand that they're not going to, whatever happiness they're enjoying in this kind of situation, it's not going to be, I mean, you can tell because we're here on earth, they're going to be unhappy sometime later today, you know. And so they have the happiness, this sangsparshaja bhoga has a beginning and an end. It's not eternal happiness. So it's not the kind of happiness that one gets from within through Krishna consciousness.
So studying the Bhagavad-gītā turns a walk through Los Gatos as a time for observation to see and to observe how, as Krishna describes in the Bhagavad-gītā, the world is working. Thank you, Kṛṣṇa Prabhu. So that sign said, everybody move up. Okay, 1, 2.
Thank you so much for the nice class. I had a question, and the question was about the mode of passion, that how you were mentioning one has to be very careful even for the slightest bit of the mode of the passion. So my question is, how do we distinguish that our desire to do more service is actually driven by mode of passion, or it's actually has a spiritual intention?
Devotional service in the mode of passion is marked by being a separatist. When you're doing your service, you think, I'm doing this to be better than everybody else. That comes from Kapila Dev, because Devahuti wanted to know the same thing. How do you understand? Yeah, it's devotional service, but it's tinged with passion. And there can be devotional service tinged by ignorance, by passion, by goodness, and then there's transcendental devotional service that has its symptom. Okay, yes, it was Kennedy next.
Hare Krishna. In yesterday's lecture and in today's lecture, you've mentioned in different contexts things coming of their own accord. Is there a right balance to that? And how do we know that we're letting that happen? Because sometimes it can be very anxiety-ridden to let go of things, but at the same time, like with Sudama, you mentioned yesterday, you can also become attached to the poverty of whatever comes.
Yeah, it's helpful to have a wife, because Sudama's wife noticed that he was. This is a story I told yesterday from the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's a story about a very advanced but austere in the sense that he was abhorrent of the material world and material sense gratification to the degree that he avoided being part of it. And that meant he had no money, no financial plan, no 401k, and not even enough food in the house to keep them fully fed. And his wife, I was just reading about it this morning again. His wife was out of service to her husband, was thinking, I really want him to be able to eat properly because he's too austere. And that's why she recommended he he go meet Krishna. He didn't want to do it on that basis to ask anything, but she, out of service to him, wanted him to go see Krishna. And then Krishna balanced it out, because it's a long story and you heard it yesterday, but he went there with an offering his wife had arranged, which is all they could afford, which is nothing. They borrowed some old, not super old, but it just wasn't high quality rice. And he brought that, and he was embarrassed to offer to Krishna, but Krishna took it from him, knowing that he had brought it, and was so grateful for his humble mood and the simple offering that he brought, that he thought, Krishna thought, even though I own everything, if I give him everything in this world, it still won't be enough in exchange for that one palmful of rice that he gave me. And then when he got home, his home was opulent. And that balance that you're asking about is explained by our acharyas in that ending section of that Leela, that Krishna could understand that Sudama was attached to being poverty-stricken and not touching anything in the world, so he induced him to have more, to show him that he could live in opulence and still not be attached to it, because it's about how much he's attached to Krishna. And the balance for anyone comes in observing, am I using it in Krishna's service? Do I need it for service? And it's one of the guiding principles for moving through this world, because we have to make a lot of decisions, right? There's a way in which, if we don't have a philosophy when we make decisions, then we'll feel bewildered. Anything you want to do, if you want to adjust your health, you have to have a philosophy. And you can't just watch every YouTube either, because there are different philosophies. If you want to deal with your finances, you have to have a philosophy and stick to it. Otherwise, you're going to buy high and sell low. And in Krishna consciousness, you also have to have a philosophy. It is a philosophy, a guiding philosophy. And that decision-making process and the philosophy behind Krishna consciousness is, the basis of it is seeing that everything is paraphernalia in the universe. We don't reject anything, but we see everything as something to engage in Krishna's service. And if we do it by that, for instance, if you want to buy a house and you have several locations you're looking at, then sticking to the philosophy, the best way to decide would be, where would be most beneficial for my service? Where would I be able to serve Krishna the best? And I know people who buy houses specifically so they can use them in Krishna's service. I've seen a few cases of that around here, or a lot of cases, because there are cheaper places to live, in case you haven't noticed. And however, some people make a choice and they say, I'm going there for service, therefore I'll pay whatever it takes. So if you keep asking that question, that helps to balance our relationship with the material nature. And it may have to be readjusted at some point. Say there's certain things at certain times in your life you might not need. There are various stages of life. That's one of the ways Varnashrama addresses what our needs are at particular stages of life. And you're given opportunity at certain times to collect and keep things and learn how to use them. And you're giving opportunity at other times in your life, when it's more natural, to learn how to give them up and live without them again. And both of them they're equally valid, because it's all about engaging in Krishna's service. Yes. Were you going to say something? You have the mic, so go ahead. Tie goes to the runner. You just put the green on, and then if it's not on, you file a complaint with our...
Hare Krishna. I wanted to ask a question just really practically in the moment. Like this Sunday evening is always a special time for me, and I find there you're tuned correctly and you're listening to the right things and you're thinking of the right things. Then Monday to Friday happens, and you find yourself getting sometimes lost in the week, and you might make a mistake, you might be angry or whatever it might be. And when you catch yourself in the moment, maybe you can do chanting or in your mind or whatever, but what do you recommend? Like, what's the right thing to do in those moments when you catch yourself just making one of those mistakes and not overcoming what you're supposed to?
Well, such a great question. Thank you. I find that the morning time before I go out into the world and do my duties, whatever day of the week is the time in which I prepare myself for the rest of the day and whatever is going to come to me. And there's the practice of japa, which is a kind of self-observation. Swadhyaya, it's mentioned by Kṛṣṇa in that section on austerities of speech. One should regularly recite the Vedas, and part of that practice is to observe its effect on you and contemplate what you're hearing. So japa is a time when you can deliberately look inwardly and notice how your mind is working, and notice that you're separate from your body, and then you can take deep shelter of the idea that you're a servant of God, and you can utter His name and pray for service. And if you can arrange a time to do that and a place, do it very deliberately, even for 5 minutes. And you can have an experience, even if it's a seemingly at the time insignificant, because you might say 5 minutes. Yogis used to sit for 10,000 years. Well, we don't have that much time now. 5 minutes is a lot in our day, isn't it? So if you can do 5 minutes and you can have this sense of the verse I quoted tonight, Yon tor sukar tararamas, the happiness that's within, just the fact that you exist. And you also can notice that the emotions that come up, one of the emotions is, you got to get going. You can't sit here. You can be a witness to that, as Kṛṣṇa calls it in the Bhagavad-gītā, kshetrajñā. You can be the one who knows your body, not the one who is your body. And that's the problem that we have on Mondays and Fridays. We've touched Rajogun so much that it seems impossible to not associate with the mind and body. That's what Rajogun does to you. It scrambles your brain. And so you have to unscramble your brain. And you have to take time to do that. A comparison I've given previously is about shopping when you're hungry. Did anybody ever tell you don't shop when you're hungry? Because it's crazy. You think, oh, that wouldn't happen to me. But if you're hungry and you go shopping, you start pulling out all kinds of stuff. What about that? Yeah, I heard about that too. And it's not even stuff you eat, but it's a natural tendency when you're hungry to take things you don't need. And when we're in Rajogun, we're hungry for all the objects of the world. And we get overwhelmed by them because there's too many of them. So if we can have that experience, just for a moment even, longer the better. In the morning time before we go out, it's like you had a nice meal, then you go shopping. Then you're commonsensical. Don't you need that? I was like, no, not today, not this week, maybe not ever. And that's the experience. Yontar sukho tararamas tatantar jyotirevaha. Yeah, Sabrahma yogi nirvanam. There's a sense of nirvana, which means that fire of rajas is snuffed out. You don't have it anymore. So that's what our teacher taught us, and is a tenet of the practice of Krishna consciousness is to take time in the morning. You got to have a good morning program, otherwise you're going to go out and fill up your cart with all the stuff you don't need. Who is next? Hi, Bali. Who raised their hand over here? Oh yeah, Vrajaras Bhavana, how could I forget you?
Hare Krishna, this is connected to Kennedy's question and refers back to another story you mentioned, I think, last week on Gajendra, and how he faced a reversal by the will of Providence. And I was wondering, what does that mean? Because the law of nature is that every action has a consequence, and so everything that we face, shouldn't that come from some previous action of ours? What does it mean when it comes from Providence? Is that like a separate entity that dictates things?
A separate entity? There is no separate entity. That's Vadanti tat tat vavidas tat famyaj jnanamadvayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavaniti shabdite. The absolute truth is advaya gyan tattva. Absolute truth means there is no two things, there's only one. But there's variety within it. And it all traces back to Krishna. And there's intelligent design in the universe. It's so intelligent, it's better than ChatGPT. And so much so that it tracks whatever we're doing for as long as we're in contact with the material nature, which is more and more understandable nowadays, isn't it? Just by our own experience with technology. And so, in a way, and somebody asked this question the other day when I brought up providential occurrences. They said, what does it mean if it's providential? I'd like to amend my answer. Everything's providential. And that's the spirit of the Bhagavatam, in which Brahma says that everything happens. A devotee realizes everything's providential. Whatever comes to us is providential, in the sense that it's all being controlled by a higher power. And that higher power is personal, the higher power is intelligent, the higher power is benevolent, higher power has our best interests in mind, and therefore we can take it like that. And if you take it like that, then you're eligible to, you've learned your lesson, you can graduate. It means you got 1600 on your SAT, and they give you a complimentary PhD in the universe. There's a little graduation ceremony here in the world when you learn that, and then you get to move out of the little schoolhouse, and there's those little desks you have to sit in. You don't have to do finals anymore. Does that sound good? Did I answer your question, or was it too glib?
And that answers it. So providential falls in the same category of karma and so on.
Well, look it up. See what they say, providential. There is a sense, providential means, in one sense, that it's coming from something, a power beyond your control, something that is, okay, let's hear it directly, and maybe there's a little history of the word there. If there's not, we'll ask Kṛṣṇa. Go ahead.
Occurring at a favorable time, opportune, or involving divine foresight or intervention.
That's pretty good.
Providential, 1610s pertaining to foresight, 1640s as pertaining to divine providence. From Latin, providentia, foresight, precaution, foreknowledge, meaning by divine interposition effected by the providence of God, is recorded from 1719.
Yeah, kind of like I just said. Okay? Everything's providential. The insurance company is called Providential. Leave it to the Americans to come up with. Just like we used to have True cigarettes. They're called True. Okay, so now let's try. Oh, yes, Kṛṣṇa Prabhu would like to say more about the origin and implications of providence.
Not the word so much, but it reminded me of the verse in the Brahma Samhita, Yastvindra Gopa Matavendra Mahosva Karma, that that Krishna is both awarding exactly everyone what they get according to the chain of their karma, but then for those who are imbued with devotion, he's burning up to the roots all of the desires that come out of their previously performed karma. And Lord Brahma is offering his obeisances to that Krishna who's behind everything, behind both the karma and also both the liberation from karma.
What a well-placed verse. Yes, Twindra Gopamata Vendra Mahosa Karma means from Indra, who's king of heaven, down to what's called the Indra Gopa. It's a tiny little insect that you can barely see with your eyes. So whether it's Indra or whether it's the tiny little germ, they're all working according to providential forces. Karma is moving them. But when they switch their mode of life to Yastvindra Gopama Tavendra Mahosa Karma Bandhanu Rupa Palabhajana Matanoti Karmani Nirdahati Kintucha Bhakti Bhajam. So that karma is Nirdahati, it becomes diminished and then stricken from the record of those who are practicing bhakti. That goes back to your point, Arman, about practicing devotional service, is the direct route to do this. You don't have to do this step-by-step Ashtanga process. You can go directly to the practice of devotional service and then come to this position of diminishing your karma and developing inner happiness, seeing Krishna directly. He's always there, and we have a direct relationship with him. We're part of him. And that can be achieved by devotional service. The most important aspect of which is chanting, so let's try it. We'll try a little group chanting today. Would you like to try that? Well, it's a nice night for it, right? Yeah. The special process of chanting God's name is introduced by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. A very interesting way he introduced it. He had interesting ways of introducing philosophical points and spiritual practices. And the way he emphasized this chanting was that although he is an incarnation of God, he showed the example by accepting a spiritual master. I mean, what does God need with a spiritual master? But he showed the example, and he was on a dutiful mission to respect his father's passing, which is a Shraddha ceremony. It's done in Gaya. And he had gone there, and before that time he was more academically oriented and not so much devotionally oriented as a young man. And when he met his to-be teacher there and requested to take his shelter, learn from him, become a disciple, and his spiritual master accepted him, Srila Ishvarapuri. When he came back to his hometown, he had totally changed. And so much so that after receiving his spiritual master's blessing to chant this mantra that we were just chanting as the very means for practicing spiritual life every day. In fact, he gave him this emphatic verse that comes from one of the ancient scriptures that says 3 times that this is the only way to practice in this present age. But what he did was, when he chanted, he fell to pieces. Tears would shoot from his eyes. He would roll on the ground. This is not to be imitated. But it was natural that he had this. It's a long story why he did, but he felt so emotional in chanting, and it put him in such a state that he thought maybe he got the wrong mantra. So this is the part I always find interesting. He went back to his guru to verify. He said, just checking, did you give me the right mantra? And his spiritual master said, why do you ask? And he said, well, whenever I chanted, tears start shooting from my eyes. I lose control of myself. I roll on the ground and I don't even care who's watching. And his spiritual master said, very good, very good. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taught the ways in which we may transform our lives, and he gave a simple process. It's not hard. You don't have to change your style. You don't have to wear different clothes. You don't have to move anywhere. You don't have to give up all your stuff. You just have to add this one thing, which is the sacred names of God. And if you chant it in this mantra, which is a formula, then gradually, as is said in another song, it's a bhajan written by a much more contemporary saint, where he said, Krishna bolbe jabe pulak habe jorbe antki bolitai. Then you too will feel this spiritual emotion from chanting. It's very, very powerful. So be careful when driving. Don't chant when you're driving. Well, do chant when you're driving, but don't count it as your 16 rounds. And so forth. So it's been just such a lovely time being here all together. And now it's going to get even better because we have the main program for the night, which is the Hare Krishna Dance Festival. Feel free to dance. You can put your arms in the air like this. It releases. There's birds living in here that are always annoying. And if you put your hands in the air and sing, they'll all go flying away. When you go home, they say, what happened to you? I was dancing at the Hare Krishna Dance Festival. I let go of all my cares and anxieties and just let Krishna guide your life. So now we're going to put away all the asanas. That's what you're sitting on. And we're going to roll up this carpet. We're going to reveal the best part of this whole community, which is the floor. Please appreciate the trees who have given themselves for this floor. These are real trees. And they have this way of, it's a little give. It's not a marble floor. So you can dance on this and you won't be injured. And it's very soft on the feet. So let's put away all the asanas, and then we'll get up and start over again. Usually the ladies are on this side, gentlemen on that side, a little corridor down the middle. But you can mix and match as you like. It's no hard and fast rule. Make yourself at home. We'll see you back here in 2 minutes. Hare Krishna.